Hello everyone, nice to see you. Hello. We are all gathered here at the Brookside Inn Retreat Center in Aurora, my hometown. I'm Andrew Nelson.
I'm Cindy Schneider.
Brian Gordon.
Chris Nealy.
And we are getting together this weekend to talk through some of our autism and theater ideas. We've been having a great conversation so far, and we're trying to kind of create new approaches, new ideas, as well as just talk about what everybody's been doing. So on Facebook, we posted that you guys could ask some questions while we're all together, and thank you for responding to those. So we're going to chat a little bit about those. The first one comes from our dear friend Carol Ann Edscorn. Hi, Carol Ann.
Hi, Carol Ann.
Remember me?
Big hug.
We miss you.
Hello.
And Carol Ann wanted to know, how do we translate theater speak into education speak or speech and language speak when we're interacting with people in school systems? How do we take our kind of artistic vocab and adapt that for the school setting and for teachers?
Well, I've done a lot of work with teachers as a consultant first, in terms of just the educational setting, and then I've done trainings as well as an acting antics person, theater person, doing trainings for both special educators and educators in regular ed. So it's been really interesting, and I think one of the things is that, first of all, when I'm able to actually do a workshop and have the adults do the activities, they really start to see the possibilities, and that it doesn't become, it's no longer a foreign language. So the theater speak just becomes much more practical to them. They really enjoy it. So, being able to kind of make teachers aware of those things that are already kind of innate in the classroom. For example, teachers are performers, there's no question about that. And as we get our students involved, they become that too. So how can we further that and use it even in more situations to help interaction, which is of course what largely our focus is with the population that we work with, but even to be able to use it in regular ed situations, some of the theater games and activities, even for content area, but you're making much more of a human connection while you're doing content, and you're using that whole theatrical communicating with the people in the audience as well as with each other. There's just so much that can be done, but I think that people almost have to experience it to really understand it and how powerful it can be.
Nice. Okay. All right, next question. Maybe you two can chime in on this one. This one comes from Riley Brame. I think I'm saying your last name right, Riley. Thank you so much for sending in your question. But he was wondering, what are the positive and negatives of having peer models in social theater groups?
Okay, so it has to
Well,
be
I can say what the question's making me think, but I don't know if it's the direction that the person was headed in. I could see two directions. One of them is, do we think that neurotypical peer models are helpful to be part of social skills groups? And that isn't the part that I was going to answer.
Well,
but if that's what you meant, do you want to
yeah,
take
I'll
that?
talk a little bit about that. We try to utilize peers integrated into our groups, and I don't think there's never really a downside. I think that that's a great thing to be able to do, to have this mix of kiddos. And part of the reason for that is that if you have kids who are pretty socially able and have a lot of the skills that some of our kids don't, they can be a role model. And also you have a number of ways in which you can pair kids off for different activities. So for example, I have a child or a youngster or a teen in my group who is struggling a little bit with some of the more abstract things, some of the theater games or whatever, and I'm going to pair them off for an activity. Then perhaps I pair that typical peer with that person, because they're better going to be able to pick up the social cues. That neurotypical peer is going to be able to maybe better pick up and be able to adjust.
If you kind of look at like improv activities or any kind of theater activities, particularly if it's a classroom full of kids who know each other, whether they're kids on the spectrum or they're neurotypical kids, the trouble will probably be in terms of just creativity and nervousness and and sort of mental block would be the neurotypical kids, not the kids on the spectrum, because they have the structure of the rules that exist from improv, and that gives them lots of freedom within parameters. And because there's different issues like facial expression and so forth, a lot of stage fright doesn't exist for some kids because they don't even register what kinds of emotions are being mirrored back at them. Where, like, God, I remember as far back as, 3rd grade, where one minute you're talking to your friends and then you get called on in class, and all of a sudden it's like those people are just all judges now, and you're nervous, and they're not even your friends anymore, they're just something else. And so there's this idea that it's sort of the opposite. The unstructured, difficult time would be for the neurotypicals playing those games, where the difficult time for kids on the spectrum would be what would be considered the really easy time for neurotypical kids, which is the unstructured time, where they're at lunch, or they're passing through the hallway, where they're the most relaxed, and they're not worried about how they're actually attending to how other kids are regarding them. So the idea of maybe creating a communications class or a group building class that mixes the two populations.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like it. I think the piece of this that doesn't quite address this specific question, but it does in my mind, is we so often look at autism people, we so often look at autism as the spectrum that it's recognized as, and then for whatever reason, something I've found myself as well guilty of is lumping neurotypicals into not a spectrum. And so you have, autism is this huge spectrum, and all these other diagnoses are these huge spectrum, and suddenly neurotypicals are just all just here. And everybody's like this. And integrative with neurotypical to me always kind of throws me off, because I can look here and I'm trying to figure out which of us is actually neurotypical.
Well, none of this. I'll tell you that right now.
But you notice that they use the word typical. It's not neuro amazing or neuro fabulous. It's just typical. Just.
I don't want to stomp. Are you?
Yeah, go for it.
One thing that Cindy's the master of is you're an actor. I don't care, I care about what diagnosis you might bring, but first and foremost, you're an actor, which kind of takes this whole conundrum and says, well, that's secondary to the fact that you're just here to be a performer in the arts. You're an actor.
But the other thing that I think is important when you talk about the discomfort of some of the kids who are socially very able in other situations, is that you don't jump right into, at least I don't, jump right into improv, because improv is hard. Improv puts you on the spot. We start with group games that don't put anybody on the spot, that are going to make everybody comfortable and laugh and become colleagues. So that piece of it, I think, too, is really important. And also, if you are going to use the so-called neurotypical peers, is that it's really important for them to understand that they're part of the group, that they're not assistant helpers,
Right.
that they're not, whatever, that they are part of I just want you to be part of the group, I think that's real important, because, otherwise it really doesn't work to me. It's a whole different animal.
All right, last but not least, this comes from Elizabeth Fine, who many of us met a few summers back at the Autism Society conference.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Liz. She wanted to know, what do we think about the overlap between theater itself and other forms of creative work like collaborative story writing and storytelling, and how do you meld those things intentionally in our work?
But one thing, a group I'm doing right now is, so improv actually absolutely staying away from, and so initially with groups, because it's really, if you can do improv, that's a really difficult task. You're talking about going off script and doing these things innately, and that's a challenging part for a lot of the kids we work with. Whereas being creative and going outside the box can be kind of built into some of the activities. And so the way I operate groups a lot of times is if the group wants to kind of build a story instead of going off of a predetermined script or predetermined narrative or short story or anything else, we kind of design it as we go along. And so I just actually had a group that's going on right now that a few weeks ago we decided they wanted to write their own script and design their own story and design their own characters. And so we got to the script story writing part, and someone came up with this concept of writing out as comic book. So we didn't have to, there are reading differences and writing differences, and can we just draw it and discuss it that way? And so we designed really what is a storyboard. I mean, and filmmakers, it's a storyboard. Our group, it's a comic book. That story creation process, I use a lot of visuals. I'm a big visual support person, and so even creating a story, it's kind of the steps in a graphic organizer of design the characters and who are the characters and what do they look like and what are their names, and then designing the setting. So when is it and where is it and what does this look like before we ever get to the actual piece of what's happening, because those are the very concrete pieces that as we build those we can start putting them together in action, which is a little more abstract. And so all of that becomes, instead of straight just sitting back and telling the story, we're building it in this very interactive process of designing the character. And so we'd all sit around and sketch out this character and make up the name. And then next week we come in and we form a wardrobe team of 3 or 4 guys, and then one person goes up and we pull from our props, pull from our sets, pull from our clothes, our jackets, and create this character. And so this week we've got the characters, we've seen them, we've gone into voices and movements, and still don't have a story. And so next week it becomes putting on the wardrobe, putting on the costume, getting back into that character, and now we know we're on Pluto, we know we have an alien and a giant dragon, and there's a monkey pirate, and what are they doing? We have no idea now, we're 4 weeks in, and it becomes much easier for these guys, and for myself, to sit down and then say, so this is what he's doing. Because now we already have seen this character moving, we've seen this character breathing and acting, and see what he sounds like doing. Before we ever started writing, we did Sell Your Partner as these characters. And so these characters have kind of become more concrete, living, breathing type of beings. So now we're telling the story, so it becomes, again, absolutely abstract, absolutely creative, absolutely outside the box. But for all of us in this group, they are much more real now.
Well, one other quick comment about the integrating different things is one thing we try to do, and this is not our focus, but we do have the kids work on scenery kinds of things, especially if that's their interest. Like you just find with certain groups, there's a bigger interest in that kind of thing. So we'll let them really kind of run with what they want to do with scenery. For other kids, they're not as interested, or sometimes we just have 1 or 2 that are really more artistic in nature, and we try to let them run with it, and/or design, program design, or the T-shirt design or whatever. So again, integrating what their interest is into that, real important, just a little piece.
And Liz, I remember when you and Howard Moody were talking about this, you guys did some amazing stuff with creating characters and character interviews and all sorts of adventure, fantasy-driven stuff that you guys presented on. So share that with everybody, because you guys had some great experience there. Any other parting shots before we say goodbye? The first time
so quiet.
these two.
We should do camera on.
Anything, Brian?
Are you teasing? No, I just, no, I'm good. I'm good.
I'm sure there'll be a part 2.
Thanks for your questions, and
Yeah.
I hope that was helpful. Can people respond with videos?
Why not?
That would be really interesting if people could do that, because if you get something out that way, because sometimes it's just a little flat when you're typing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this comes alive, but it'd be really great for this idea of video being attached to the Autism Theater Network to be this really great way for everybody to meet each other.
I think the permissions are set up where if you want to post, you can attach some video if you want to respond that way. That's a super idea. Or a link. Put something on YouTube and link it out, or just post a video directly to this discussion, or create your own. What the heck?
And stay tuned. We're trying to brainstorm about some new and exciting events and things. So.
Goodbye.